Chandler Morgan here in the WBTV News Now desk on this gloomy morning in Charlotte. We want to bring in an expert to talk with us about a recent study that came out. Specifically with us today, we have Jacob Channel from Lending Tree. Jacob, thanks for being with us to talk about this new study.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and specifically what we're talking about, so let's kind of back up here. So back to August, this past August, when the Supreme Court struck down the CDC's eviction moratorium. Now we're learning, of course, millions of Americans are at risk of eviction, but North Carolina in particular ranking 8th, which is in the higher percentage of renters who say that they're behind on payments and they're somewhat likely or very likely to be evicted.
It is. It's a pretty high percentage, especially when you look at it from a national perspective. I think that it maybe is a little bit surprising to see North Carolina that high up on the list. But when you start to take into account, for example, the state is a little bit more friendly toward landlords than it is towards renters, and you also have maybe a slightly lower incomes than you might find in other states, certainly a little bit lower than, say, the national average. I think you combine those two factors, and what you see are people who are not only behind on their rent, but who are also afraid that they're actually going to be evicted.
Jacob, what kind of trends do we usually see when people are at risk of being evicted? Is there a certain area within the United States that these trends typically fall near?
Yeah, so usually what you see are oftentimes southern states or states that are maybe a little bit more economically disadvantaged, where renters are a little bit more likely to be evicted.
And why is that? Why is there any kind of rhyme or reason why it tends to fall that way?
Well, I think that what it is that if oftentimes what people in those states don't have is a lot of income, a lot of financial resources to cushion themselves if they fall on hard times. So, for example, with the pandemic, what we've seen is high unemployment rate, which has fallen significantly, but there are still a lot of people who are unemployed, a lot of people who maybe made less money than they did before the pandemic. And as a result, there are people who are now, especially with the Supreme Court ending the eviction moratorium, saying, oh no, I can't afford to make my monthly rent, and I don't have any savings or any other sort of financial safety nets that I can rely on to make ends meet until I get a better job or go back to work or something to that effect.
So what should someone do if they fall in this category where they're behind on rent, they feel like they might see an eviction coming? What's the next step here?
So I think that the first thing that you should do, and probably the best thing to do, is to just get in contact with your landlord and let them know honestly and openly what's going on. Depending on who your landlord is, you might be able to work something out where you get to keep staying where you're at, where maybe you defer rent payments or you work out a different type of payment plan. But you don't know until you ask. So if you're falling behind, if you think you're going to fall behind, the first thing you should do is pick up your phone, call your landlord and say, hey, look, this is what's happening. What can we do about it?
When you're looking at your long-term portfolio, and I'm wondering how an eviction plays into that, if you're trying to down the line rent again, what does that look like?
Yeah, so an eviction isn't something that goes on your credit score, for example, into your credit report. So if your landlord or whoever is just pulling your credit report, they might not see that you've been evicted in the past. That being said, evictions are public record. So if you're looking to rent in the future and your landlord does a background check and they find that you've been evicted, then they might be less likely to rent to you because, in essence, what being evicted did was show them that you're a less reliable or a riskier investment for them. So certainly being evicted can hurt your chances of finding a new place to live in the future.
And so if you are in a situation where you have lost your job or you're just under a financial hardship at the time and you can no longer afford where you're living, at that point, are you suggesting go directly to your landlord to try and get out of that situation so you can set yourself up for something better?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. Even if you have to end up moving, if you get in contact with your landlord and they say, all right, well, you can't stay here because I can't lower the rent or I can't let you live here without paying rent for a few months. Being able to leave more on your own terms and not being officially evicted will make your life a lot easier in the long run. So even if you do have to leave, you'll be able to maybe do so in a little bit more of an organized manner and a little bit more on your terms. And you also won't have an eviction following you around for years and years.
Jacob Channel here with us from Lending Tree. Thank you so much for the insight on where North Carolina stands and what to do if you are falling in one of those categories.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And, I'm sorry that this report doesn't have the greatest news for a lot of people, but certainly there are ways that you can make sure that, you're protecting yourself financially and that hopefully you have a home in the future.
Jacob, thank you. If you are here with us back in the News Now desk, we are just going to take a quick reset for you. Then we're going to have another live look at the tower cam.